Welcome to this first of three marine biosecurity webinars. Today we're talking about who should pay for marine biosecurity. My name is Peter Lawless. I'm facilitating the session today, and I'll have the panelists introduce themselves in a moment. And Zoe Hawkins is our able organizer and behind the scenes facilitator. So just how the session will go, if you can go to the next slide, Zoe. We've got the five panelists. They're going to introduce themselves in a moment, and then they will have a few minutes to outline things from their perspective. We're very grateful to have such a broad range of perspectives coming in here now. Marine biosecurity is everybody's business. I look after marine biosecurity in the top of the South Island, and I guess we might be winning. But this topic of who should pay for marine biosecurity has been on the cards since we began in 2009. There are different models all over the country and different areas of cost and benefit. A lot of this is done under the Biosecurity Act, which talks about exacerbators, the people that make things worse, and beneficiaries, the people who receive benefit. But of course, these are quite widely distributed in the system. And the models that we have around the country go everything from the boaties and the facilities pay to the ratepayers pay or the taxpayers pay. I'm going to be interested to hear what you have to say, Dave Taylor. Marine farming industry pays in different ways, as do ports and marinas. And so we need to include all of those perspectives as we talk about who should pay for this. The amazing thing for me over this time has been all of our cost-benefit analyses show that if far more was spent, the benefits would really outweigh the costs. And we're seeing that with the news in the last week about Calliope brachypus making its way into Northland from Great Barrier Island, and the range of beneficiaries and the exacerbators suddenly expands at a point where everybody likes to point fingers about who should have done what in the meantime. But certainly we know that prevention is better than cure, and cure in many cases is impossible. Not for Mediterranean fanworm, as we might hear today. But really, who should be paying, who should be investing, who are the exacerbators, who are the beneficiaries? If you end up at the end of this with more questions than answers, that'll probably be a good thing. If you go to the next slide, Zoe, we'd like you to keep your cameras on where you can, so it keeps it more personal, people can see things. We would like you to put your questions into the chat box. Zoe will be monitoring those and grouping them up for responses from the panel. So after the panelists have had their uninterrupted say, we'll have about half of the time remaining for interactive sessions. We will keep the call on after 11. We'll bring the panel discussion to an end at that point, but we'll leave it open, and there may be people that want to say more things, and we'll manage that as we can, and Zoe and I at least will be here for that part of the session. But let's go to our panelists at this point. Dave Taylor, can you introduce yourself, please?
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Dave Taylor ahau, ki te mahi ahu moana o Aotearoa, he mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nehi o Wakatū e noho nei au. Good morning, I'm Dave Taylor. I'm the Technical Director at Aquaculture New Zealand, based in Nelson. My role looks after the innovation and technology and biosecurity portfolios there. And I've been heavily involved in both the aquaculture-based biosecurity programs and also working closely with MPI in their biosecurity programs as well. So, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Dave, and thanks for modelling that. Craig.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Craig Thorburn, and I've got a background in marine science and working with Waiheke Marine Project as a steering committee member for the last couple of years, and also with Kelly Tarleton's Marine Wildlife Trust working on a range of projects around marine restoration, monitoring of our nearshore reef systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. And David Abercrombie.
Kia ora tātou. I am the CE of Yachting New Zealand. We have a club membership base as well as commercial, non-commercial members. Our membership's around 25,000. So we have a national reach from Bluff basically to Cape Reinga, and feel that we, as recreational boaties in the main, have a position in which we can help bring together a coordinated approach. I think to Peter's point, some of these issues we can't solve, but I think together we can make an impact. You know, I have a personal story in that I've fished, dived, sailed pretty much everywhere on the East Coast, from the Waitemata to Cape Reinga, and I've, over my too many years, have seen substantial changes in what were our pristine waters. And I think we, as an organisation, understand that the biosecurity issues that we're facing at the moment are not due to recreational boaties initially, although we may in some ways have contributed to the spread. And I think we have some important messages to our members that we can contribute to reduce that spread. And I'll be interested in some of your thoughts there. But I think as from a personal perspective and from an organisational perspective, we have a social duty and personal duties to protect and restore, you know, our marine environments for our future generations. And I strongly feel that if we don't do something now, then the environments that we've all enjoyed so much are not going to be there for our children and for our grandchildren.
Thank you, Dave. Don.
Mihi ana koutou, ko tō Mackenzie toko ino, kau te pau haumāra koe ora ki te kaunihera, aroa ia taitoki rau. As a group manager for biosecurity in the Regional Council, we kind of play the role as a regulator. And for about the last 15 years, we've been working on rules, regulations, which really try to improve vessel compliance in terms of the biofouling on their hulls. And that's a kind of a significant pathway that we all know kind of how marine pests get spread around. You know, my personal background, my whakapapa goes back to a place called Waipu here in Northland. And all my whakapapa right back more than 2,000 years is actually connected with the ocean. So for personally, I love that. We've had, I love the water. I'm a free diver, love spearing. We've had all sorts of different boats. I don't like yachts. my partner made me give up the yacht, but we've had boats, and that's been great. In today's session, who should pay? I see so many costs with marine biosecurity, marine pests, and we're so vulnerable as a country. We are, as Peter said earlier, in the midst of a response in Northland to Kalupa at the moment. I see the costs much more with our hapu and iwi that are forefront in these places, trying to deal with these new invaders that aren't going to go away.
So Don, I'll just pause you because that's what you're going to get into next.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Peter has trouble stopping me, so kia ora.
No. It's all good. Chris.
Kia ora tātou, ko Chris Galbraith tuko inga. I'm chair of NZMOA, the New Zealand Marine Operators Association, who have 96% membership of all mariners in New Zealand, and probably around about 70% of all boatyards in New Zealand as members. Very active organisation and very closely aligned to this issue, and have been for a number of years. I would say we're heavily into the learning aspect and process, and we've got variability through our sector and our interest in that in this issue, but as a whole, very passionate. I'm also the General Manager of the Bay of Islands Marina in Northland. Kia ora.
Thank you, Chris. Right, now we can get into it. We'll go where Don was leading us, but we'll go first with Dave Taylor. I'll give you a bing bong warning at 3 minutes, Dave, and cut you off at 4. Away you go.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, well, for the aquaculture industry, obviously being good environmental stewards and guardians of our growing environment, it's part of our core values. It's what we do. We're out in the water every day, so we're often the first to notice when things aren't quite right or aren't, unusual things are turning up. And we've had the experience of marine pests and diseases. The consequences both of poorly coordinated responses. And with low likelihood of success, which comes at great cost. But we've also seen, the ongoing costs of marine pests and diseases. So we've experienced both, and we know that being part of the whole biosecurity system, aquaculture is really keen to not only just do its part, but actually lead the way in marine biosecurity, and we've been doing that. For the last, since I've been in aquaculture New Zealand, at least, we've developed biosecurity standards for all of our growing species, which lay out what goes into our on-farm biosecurity management plans, which recognises that marine farmers for a long time have been doing biosecurity at some level, but now they know exactly what they can do to put controls around what the riskiest pathways are, and they're doing that actively now, which is fantastic. Our standards also lay out a national framework for pathway management. So taking a look at marine biosecurity nationally, because we farm from the very top of the north right down to the bottom of the South Island, we've taken a national approach to marine biosecurity, and we think this is something that could benefit all of New Zealand, is actually having a national coordinated plan for marine biosecurity rather than a regional based one. And that national framework works on operational zones, which sort of align closely with our top of the north, top of the south partnerships and other biosecurity partnerships that take into account connectedness of the marine environment and even the land-based environment as well. So that's all in our biosecurity standards, and I encourage you to have a look at those. And we're working with regional and central government agencies on our readiness and response. We joined the GIA, which is the Government Industry Agreement on Biosecurity, back in 2019, and we're active members of that, learning from other primary industries around how to prepare and invest in readiness, and that's what we're doing. We're investing in our readiness and being ready to respond in a coordinated and practical way. So that's it from me, and I look forward to the discussions going on from here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You had 12 seconds left. That's great. Zoe, maybe you should just stop screen share at this point, so people can see the speakers a little bit more large. And we'll move on to Craig from Kelly Tartans.
Thank you very much, Peter. We really sort of got into the space for a couple of reasons. One is we've got a strong background in stewardship and care of our marine environment, and the Waiheke Marine Project is a mana whenua and community-led project at Waiheke that seeks to restore our environment or and encourage regeneration. And what we've seen is the degradation in the Hauraki Gulf, and a lot of the actions that we're involved with are a response to marine-based degradation. And spending more and more time in the ocean and in our coastal waters with our communities, we're seeing firsthand the results of this degradation: kina barrens, lack of critical seaweed species that are important for shellfish life cycles, lack of crayfish culture. So we're about to start our third culture survey on island this weekend. Last year we surveyed 28,000 square meters of reef. And the changes that we see are really concerning, and then clearly in recent years now, Kalupa has appeared, and we've established quite a good network globally, and have been in touch with the Californian Kalupa action team around how they've responded, and they've done 3 successful eradications to date in California, and really seeking to learn from them and say, what can we bring to the Hauraki Gulf in that space, and these discussions on who pays and those sorts of things. And I think some of the earlier comments, which are really relevant, is that prevention is the easiest way to do this, and actually early identification and eradicating early is the best response for many of our invasive species. And one of the learnings I think New Zealand's experienced probably over many generations is that monitoring and investigating and researching and tracking all those things and figuring out who pays. All the while we do that, the environment responds at an independent rate. So, the response time of our marine pests is completely unlinked to our own objectives. So it'll respond in its own way. And that's the biology of these pests that we deal with. And Calliope is a great example where, there's over 90 hectares out at Aotea and well over 3,500 square meters down at Ahuahu. And I can only say that experiences overseas is that 90 turns into 900, turns into thousands. So, that's what we've seen globally. And I think the need to have ready responses is critical. And that will always be the least expensive option, is to be ready to respond rather than try and develop a post-arrival response. So we're very keen to see that happen. And on Waiheke, we've started an early surveillance program using an underwater ROV, and we've done over 5,000 square meters of our most popular anchorages on Waiheke. And our plan is to keep surveying those at 6-monthly intervals and ensure that, if it turns up, which it's probably going to, like many other places in northeastern New Zealand, that we are ready and have those community conversations about the controls, because the controls for these species are pretty devastating. Most of it involves destroying everything that is associated with that invasive pest.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig. It's great to get that ecological perspective, and I'm really interested in where we go next with yachting, with David.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Craig, and relatively recently have been following what's being done on the island and think that what you are doing can be replicated around the country. The position that I guess we sit in as a national organisation is being able to inform and communicate with our members as to what's going on. We have the same concerns that you all share, and if we can in some way help either with communicating and having a greater awareness amongst our members, then that's going to be nothing but beneficial. As Craig had noted, we have seen significant declines in catch numbers, and we can all probably look at quotas and things like that have affected the various catches that are being recorded, and you'll all be aware of the work that Legacy are doing. But as an organisation, I think for us to be in a group such as this and to be able to share with our members how they can contribute, because we know that they are all concerned. We know that our commercial partners and our clubs and our individual members are doing their bit as best they can, but I still think they have a huge amount to learn. What we are seeing, and it is important to us, is trying to control the costs of yachting and boating for our members, and whether that's in haul outs or compliance costs. That is quite concerning to us into the future, because we don't want to add any more barriers to the enjoyment of our sport and the ability for our members and iwi and hapu to collect kaimoana. And so I think there's a much bigger picture at play here. So we just appreciate being invited in and look forward to the ongoing conversation.
Thanks, Dave. That's great. And so let's go to Don and hear from the council, the regulator's perspective, how you see all this. And Don, if you could just touch on your funding model from up there, that would be really helpful as well.
Kia ora, Peter. Yes. So Northern Regional Council that decided to impose a marine charge on vessel owners that is collected through marinas and mooring owners, and that pays for the marine biosecurity services delivered throughout the region. And it raises round about $350,000, $380,000 a year to sustain that. With that, those services include diving on about 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 hulls each year to check their biofouling status. So it's been a very good program. We've run it for the last, that particular hull survey for the last, I think, 6 years now, and worked up a huge number of hulls in terms of, understanding what the fouling status is of those hulls. And we know that, badly fouled hulls can spread marine pests around, but even moderately fouled hulls can spread pests around, and gear as well. And I think coming back to Dave's point about the need for a national plan, that's very front of mind for us, because although we've got rules here in this region, the rules aren't consistent as you go down the eastern seaboard and into the South Island. And yachties, rightly so, they don't know sailing from one region to another what rule applies. So there's a desperate need for a consistent rule about hull fouling, at least on our water at the moment. We need to be a country that's right up front with this. We've got so much to lose, and we're a kind of, although we're a long way from the heartbeat in respect of, where shipping is. We're a Pacific nation now that's receiving more and more contact and more exposure to the worst marine invaders that the world has seen, and cholera is certainly one of those. But I just want to touch on some of the hidden costs as well of what we see, our marine pests as they land in New Zealand, and particularly in Northland. We really see a cultural loss occurring. It's a slow creep in some respects, because you get species like fanworm and cholera covering our seabed, getting our pippy beds and so on. It changes the way New Zealanders enjoy our marine space. And I'm seeing that more and more. Young people appreciate it as something that's perhaps normal. They've never experienced what it's like not to have these things around them. And that's such a shame. So I think there's a big battle needed to make sure we hold the line here. We don't have to have these pests in every harbour, in every estuary, and along our coast. We just simply don't. And, I love the idea of gearing up for response. We seem to be able to do that with things like M. bovis. Well, hidden underneath the sea is another creeping kind of M. bovis. Some people would say some of the diseases are as bad as foot and mouth. Why can't we turn our attention to those and hold the line? Because those things that once they are affected, I also think some of the hidden costs for our tourism industry is that many would believe, oh, well, that's wrecked, so we're not going there. And I'd hate to think of that perception at places like the Poor Knights, simply because it's got a marine invader we can't respond to. So kia ora, Peter. I'm going to probably finish there and save you stopping me again. I wanted to use that 12 seconds of Dave's that he saved, but I think I'll call it there. So kia ora mai tātou.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. Thanks, Don. And so, Chris, how do the marina operators see this?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. There's 48 marinas in New Zealand, and we represent over about 18,000 to 20,000 marina berths. So a really tangible connection to the moana in that sense. So we're full of passionate people who love boating and are largely in support of the aspirations to protect our moana and enhance it. And we value all those things that get us out there and keep us on the water. I mean, a lot of that's evidenced by the fact we've supported for many years as an association work individually as marinas and as an organisation, those entities such as obviously the government and the MPI, the regional councils, through charter groups and various biosecurity workshops, Cawthron, NIWA. So we've been actively participating and supporting this wider endeavour. You know, we've been also the champions of the 601 Clean Hull program, and we also have been promoters of the Clean Marinas, the International Clean Marinas program for better management and best practice marina operations. So you can see we're quite controlled environments, we're highly regulated, and we do endeavour to follow best practice through our sector. And yeah, again, generally just exhibits the fact that we want to contribute positively to biosecurity in New Zealand. And we are great connectors and conduits to the boating public as well. So we see ourselves strategically being able to support the endeavours here today. And as everyone's mentioned, you know, we'd highly value and support a national plan for biosecurity. The consistency issue is really something that we would love to see flow through. Being more specific about costs, I mean, obviously marinas are large structures occupying the CMA. You know, we get infestations, we do. It's impossible to eliminate and prohibit harmful species in most cases, and it's prohibitive to clean off. You know, we're inadvertent receivers in most cases, and like I say, it's hard to defend. We also, you know, the vectors are highly variable. We've got public facilities such as fuel docks, dinghy docks, boardwalks, boat ramps, ferry ramps that we can't control access to. So it makes our roles more difficult. We're involved in trying to do the right thing. We provide sewage pump out facilities, fuel facilities, water facilities, and all the structures that support these. So in that sense, we pay a fair share. And I know this topic's about you know, who pays and the cost. So I just wanted to recognise that marinas do contribute in that sense. Our view as a sector that is that, you know, we accept and acknowledge that you know, there should be a charge for biosecurity, and we accept that the argument that the boating public should contribute to the cost of biosecurity as well, and that marinas can be a vehicle to access that. But it is very difficult to see marinas individually charged because of their diverse nature and location. So big difference here being charging structures versus boaties. I think that bit needs to be explored. And yeah, so that's me really, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I guess let's pick up with the panel as a whole. And I'd like to see if we can go straight to the main questions. So three of you, I think, mentioned the need for a national plan. A national plan under the Biosecurity Act would allow the sort of levies that that Don was talking about to be applied generally across the whole country. Marinas, and be quite good maybe if you begin this discussion, Don, by just talking about the quantum to fund your $350,000 program in relation to these structures and why you chose that and not a direct levy on boaties, for instance. And thinking this forward into the other regions in the whole country. I think I saw in the media 1.9 million spent on Kalupa so far. You know, what are those? I'm aware, Dave, that you're, I think, part of the government industry agreement on biosecurity readiness and response, which caps contributions. But the Biosecurity Act points the finger at beneficiaries as it does at exacerbators. And you're probably the most recognizable beneficiaries in this space, but not the only ones. The fishing industry, tourism, all of those things as well. You happen to be organized. And so, you know, you can become a target. But let's begin with Don, and then maybe we'll go to Dave, and then we'll pick it up from there and see how we go. So Don, can you give us a bit more perspective? If there was a national plan and the sort of approaches that you've used were used, what would that mean for anybody?
Sure, Peter. Yes, and look, we've had a team from the top of the north working on this for the past 4 years. We really want this draft out now for the public because we think it's in a suitable state. But the plan for consistent rules, at least in the top of the north, would include clean gear as well as clean hulls. And it's same standard as what we're asking international vessels to meet when they come across the border. So we've got a kind of a match up there. Yachties coming from overseas wouldn't necessarily see a different set of rules being imposed. Basically, we're asking for a slime layer and on those hulls, they have to be clean. And in terms of paying for that, what we're suggesting is that, and I think Dave raised it, but Chris has already raised it, as we do in our region with our raid, we think this is a shared model. We think there are beneficiaries, all over. People benefit from our coast and not having marine pests on it. Vessel owners, yes, they share part of the cost, but they're actually, a real part of the solution. And 99% of vessel owners that I know want to do the right thing, but they share in those costs. And we believe that the Crown needs to share in those costs as well, because it has got benefits to the nation and right across, not just from our environment, but in our tourist sector. So the structure of that plan means that we would raise a levy, and that would be collected through regional councils, really. And as I said, ratepayers would pay a share, Crown would pay a share, vessel owners would pay a share. It really pays for that dive surveillance, but also importantly, a lot of education around this as well. So people can become aware, understand the risks, and understand the values that are being protected. So we think that would be part of the advantage of having a national plan, consistent messaging, some consistent advocacy, and all of our stakeholders, coming in behind that. It's just missing at the moment. So, kia ora, Peter.
Thank you. And Dave, would the marine farming industry be prepared to put their hands in their pockets as beneficiaries under some sort of national plan arrangement?
Yeah, well, we're already, as I said, under the GA negotiating those things with government, and we're certainly already investing in marine biosecurity heavily. So absolutely, I don't see why. Well, we certainly would be and are keen to keep involved in marine biosecurity. And I think my biggest, as I said before, my biggest fear is that we don't have that national approach. Which if we don't have that approach, then leads to the experiences of the past that they're poorly coordinated, ineffective, and really costly efforts that end up in failure. And that's our experience from in 2 or 3 pests in the top of the south that we went through previously. But now we've got some really coordinated approach to Sabella in the top of the south, which has been fantastic, and we've been fully supportive of those efforts to try and keep Sabella out of the top of the south as much as possible. It's in some of the ports, harbours and marinas, but their active coordinated approach to that across the regions, because of course these pests don't recognise the lines on the map. If you go up the Hauraki Gulf, you're in Waikato on one side and Auckland on the other, but Sabella doesn't recognise that line, and we'll go across it. So, the same in the top of the south, because those pests don't recognise those lines, that the need for a coordinated approach is quite obvious, and we're seeing the benefits of that, and we'll continue to invest in those management approaches that are coordinated. Yep.
Right, and I guess what I get from listening to you, Dave, too, importantly for any body, and that's a lot of bodies, like your industry, iwi, anybody that crosses regional boundaries, to have to deal with one conversation nationally, and establish, what's equitable and doable, is going to be way more practical than having to have multiple conversations around the country with different models, different cost structures, creates all sorts of issues. It really does push us towards a national plan, doesn't it?
It does, yep.
Right. Now, other members of the panel, who'd like to chip in here?
I guess all I would say is, yeah, I think we all agree that a national plan and a coordinated approach and a shared system makes absolute sense. There is a group that will probably struggle to reach as well, but I think a low levy spread across a large number will be far more palatable in this current economic environment than a perception that some will be paying more than others. So I agree, and I think there's a piece here for the ports to be contributing into this space as well. And I haven't heard a lot of where they may fit into helping fund this, because they, through the vessels that come and go through our ports, have been major contributors to the issues that we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, and so you make a really important point there, Don. We have had a lot of focus on recreational vessels. There are a lot of recreational vessels, clearly, and they're not particularly regulated, moving around, but they're not the only vectors. And I know the aquaculture industries work to clean up their end of the scene because they're also beneficiaries, but for others, it's not such a big deal. So it's certainly a need to, in a national plan sort of concept, is to look at the whole scene. And I guess that is the sort of complexity that you're struggling with, Don. At the moment you try to swallow the whole thing, it's not that simple.
Yeah, Peter,
I'd
like to say something around
We'll just pick up Craig first, then I'll come back to Don. Yep.
Sorry, one of the things that's kind of missing at the moment is a focus on ecosystem resilience, so that we know that in many overseas countries, and New Zealand included, that our invasive species often take advantage of degraded habitat. So where we've lost biodiversity, where we have impacts from sedimentation, from coastal development, etc., then those habitats are easily colonized by these invading pests. So a stronger focus on a greater native biodiversity and protection really helps. It makes it a lot harder for those invasive pests to become established, so they really do take advantage of degraded and vacant habitat. And if we look at the sort of cost or the impact of those, we see things like increased coastal erosion. So once we've lost our biodiversity of seaweeds and our natural coastal protectors, then erosion, flooding, all those things that we are seeing and we do see in the Hauraki Gulf just get worse. So I think there's a greater interest here to say that we need a much more resilient ecosystem, and particularly in the face of our changing climate, that it does come back to saying who benefits from a more resilient marine environment, and that is actually all of us. It's not only the users who are out there perhaps fishing or boating or enjoying those amenities, but it's actually our coastal communities and others. And you look at the impact at Aotea at Okupu Beach, 50 tonne of kalupa washing up on shore. I mean, just the amount of organic material that can be generated if you let these things get away can be incredibly damaging, not only for our marine user groups, but our coastal communities as well.
Right. And as Craig, so are you saying interactions with other things that disturb the environment, things that disturb the bottom of the sea, change the flow of sediment from the land? You're sort of looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, they are all implicit in making it easier for marine pests to become established. So, overseas studies sort of show that even things like strong seagrass meadows and beds actually make it more difficult for kalupa to get established. Where you create vacant habitat, where sediments come through and created essentially a barren area, and think to some of the areas you'll dive and you will see fanworm and you will see sediment covering near shore environments. Those become prime areas for other pests to come in, like kalupa.
Right. Thanks, Craig. Don, did you want to chip in at this point?
Peter, I'd just like to come back to a point there being made around the national plan and a nationwide sort of plan. it could, you know, it could be as big as an elephant when you start to bring in all the complexities of, you know, all of our stakeholders and all the things that might contribute to a better national plan. Now, I think that's needed. However, if you looked at the top of the north, and I'm talking about from the Bay of Plenty northwards, 70% of New Zealand's marine fleet, that includes a commercial fleet, happen in that area. They birth in that area, top of the north. Now, 90% of pest spread comes from there. And I think if we want to be smart about this, we'd pick off some low-hanging fruit first and just ask ourselves, well, what could we do in that zone that would really slow the spread significantly and give us a chance? So while I'm kind of, yes, open to a much longer and more fulsome sort of national plan going right across the country, I'm also wary that that process could take many, many years. And I'm thinking, what sort of small steps, significant steps, you know, can we take that's within our grasp now? So I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, the need to act. Zoe, can I just check with you? Is there anything in the chat we should be picking up? No?
Can I add to
Dave, you go.
A question has just popped up.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you in a moment, Zoe. We'll just let Dave go. He's got his hand up. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Don that there is a risk that if you have a national plan for everything, then you'll lose some real opportunity. You could run the risk of missing some opportunities to manage some of your priority pests. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be had, is what are the priorities for those bigger regions? If Kailerpa is the priority, as your number one, what you've identified as your number one risk, then you need a plan, a national plan for Kailerpa. That's because it will go around from Bay of Plenty and go down to Taranaki and you know, in the harbour in Taranaki there before long if you're not careful. So it has to be a national plan, but if you make it pest specific, then we can get on with it and make a plan, agree with how we're going to treat it, have the conversations locally with iwi Māori around how, you know, what the consequences of having to react to respond to something turning up, to that species turning up in their rohi. So those things can happen now, and I think we should have a national plan for Sabella, we should have a national plan for Kailerpa, and we should get on with it. I think we're just too many people going, oh, this is too hard. Let's get on and make a plan. It's terrifying if we just leave this to central government, because we'll be 20 years down the track having this same conversation.
Great, thank you. And yeah, do get your comments into the chat for Zoe to pick up. We'll just go to you, Zoe, now. See what the panel might need to respond to.
No, look, there's been one comment, and it was regarding the effectiveness of anti-foul coatings, and I've just replied back to that person and really hope that they come to next week's webinar, because that's going to be a large part of that webinar. So. Okay,
just here's another one in there you might want to have a look at. The other thing that I'm conscious of, and I'll come to you, Dave Abercrombie, in a moment, is that, yeah, there's all sorts of fantastic research going on. We will pick those up in those later webinars, like the work that Cawthron's doing about how do you modify substrate surfaces in something like a port to make it favour natives over invaders, for instance. You know, there's a lot of innovative work. And for those that don't realise, this is the leading edge in the world in actually doing something about marine biosecurity. You all are the leading edge, and the rest of the world is going to learn from this. So good on all of us. Dave.
Thanks, Peter. Look, I know that the work being done in marine surfaces is really important, and we know how much work is being done in Northland and diving on hulls and structures. But there's a piece here where we have a lot of recreational boaties who are anchoring in areas and they don't know what's underneath them. And I'm sure that Dave, you'll appreciate, you don't want people coming in a 5, 6, 8 meter rib fishing on some of your aquaculture structures, carrying some of these marine pests. So I think the second piece to it is not just what's under the water, but what's also being carried above the water, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and it can be addressed, I think, very easily, and something that should be considered.
Dave, would you support or personally something like a warrant of fitness regime for vessels and maybe some competency standards for the skippers and the whole thing? Where do you stand on that?
Well, you're going down a couple of rabbit holes that without seeing all who's sitting in this room, I might get myself into trouble. Look, there's no doubt that a level of training is really important, and we're heavily involved in drowning prevention in New Zealand, and so boat management is also a big piece of that, but it can go down to kayaks and stand-up paddle boards, and where does it stop? Warrant of fitness for vessels and competency. There is a level of training that's required in terms of safety. There is no evidence worldwide to suggest that having warrant of fitness improves safety, but I think from a biodiversity perspective, there are more things that can be done, and getting a reach into those areas are really important. And we know that Chris and his team do an amazing job in the marina space, but we've also got these small boat owners that aren't members of clubs, that don't access marinas. Some of them are launching off beaches, some of them in controlled launch ramps. So we've got a wide spread of people that we need to be able to communicate with.
And every time we get a new pest like Kalupa, the deal changes, doesn't it? So we haven't really had to worry about those anchor wells and a whole bunch of things for recent years. Now all of a sudden we need people being conscious of that, so
Yep.
It changes all the time.
And there are bodies like Coast Guard who I think would be happy to be part of this conversation as well.
Yeah.
They have a wide reach, and they do some amazing work. And so to exclude them, I think is a missed opportunity.
Great, thanks, Dave. Dave Taylor's got his hand up.
Yes, sorry to come in again. Yeah, just to agree with Dave there around it's that link between health and safety and biosecurity. It's a great opportunity to have those conversations at the same time, whether that's through Coast Guard or at the marinas. Health and safety is a big part of what we do in all walks of life, and it's important to start reminding people at the same time that biosecurity is right up there. Risks where we live, where we swim, where we enjoy our environment. So you can have those conversations at the same time, and they fit quite nicely. I think as I said before, with the national approach for individual species, then you can really target those pathways. Like you say, anchor whales weren't a problem necessarily for Sabella, or maybe they were, but initially anchor whales weren't a problem, but now they are, because you've got to target it. If you had a national plan for Kalalupa, your pathway management would involve treating or educating around anchor whales nationally. That's how you could approach this. So that's what I'd like to see us working on sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so inclusiveness, I think, is a really interesting question. And at the moment, I'm aware that half the regional councils in the country are doing something, and they're doing some great jobs, often out of their rates money, and the other half are not doing anything at all. And I see Don's got his hand up. So, I reckon, Don, it should be a bit of pressure there to bring everybody on board. There's councils with significant ports who do nothing. And to me, that's that you can't have a national response unless there's some capability there. But maybe that's not what you're on about, but away you go.
Oh, no, well, I take look with that, because that's a reality. I think you've said it, Peter. I think, and that is regional government throughout this country. That's why, the importance of a national plan overcomes that. I just want to stress, though, that it needs to be a pathway plan. I'm not, that hot on going down a species-led type approach. Whilst we have responses, a pathway plan that is looking at the vectors of these pests and how they spread around, we believe will be the most successful. And we know from the research that 90% of the marine pest spread, comes from top of the north. Well, more than 90% of that actually occurs from vessels. So if you want low-hanging fruit, target the pathway. And yes, when we've got a special response like Calliope, it needs attention, it needs a specific response. But I wouldn't go down the line of trying to hunt for a national plan every time we get a new marine pest invader. I want to focus this on looking at these pathways and how effective we could be in slowing the spread by that means. So I just wanted to put that out there. Kia ora.
Yeah, so the 2011 changes to the Biosecurity Act allowed these pathways plans, which are used in some places. You're using them, Don. I guess the experience is accumulating. And so it is quite a question about whether to try to manage the vector, remembering that internationally 30% of marine pests were never a marine pest anywhere else. So we don't actually know what's the next worst pest. We reckon it's Calliope. You know, we're conscious of Pacific sea stars and things, but there may be something out there that's worse that we have no idea about. So, you know, vectors do matter. So I'm interested in comments about, you know, and Dave, I guess you want to have a response, vectors versus species-based plans.
Yeah, well, I suppose I understand where Don's coming from, and that, you know, you are targeting the highest risk, and you attack your pathways. That's fantastic. But I suppose my counter would be, how successful have you been getting that across the nation? You know, and getting that buy-in from other people, and yeah, I wonder whether, you know, while it's low-hanging fruit in one region, other people don't see that as a priority in their region. It might be marine farming, or it might be, you know, cruise ships might be the biggest risk in their region. So my counter would be, maybe the lowest hanging fruit might actually be to take an approach at a species level to start with, to get everyone all on board, to understand how they can play their part nationally, to look at surveillance in their region and understand the costs of what those surveillance for those species alone might be, let alone taking the big bite of the pie and saying we have to do this nationally for all species. Yeah, so my counter would be, let's explore the option of whether we can get buy-in around individual species to start with, to see if we could get people buying into this national approach. And then if that works, you know, if I can go to Taranaki Regional Council or, and say, look, you know, we're concerned that Sabella could get into your port and then, you know, make its way up the west coast of the North Island, you know, what are you doing about it? They say, oh yeah, we're part of the plan. You know, we're into the top of the South Biosecurity Partnership. We work with top of the North Biosecurity Partnership. We know exactly what we're doing to look for Sabella and make sure it's not spreading. I don't know, it seems to me to be an easier conversation than just saying, oh, you guys have to worry about the hulls of your recreational vessels coming and going. I think it needs to be more of a national plan around all of the pathways.
Right,
For those
lots
species.
of good thoughts there. Chris, I'm interested, just to come back to you, been listening hard there. From your perspective, you know, at the pointy end of running things, and we're in the last 5 minutes. I'd be really interested for you to give us some sort of overview comments about what you make of all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think it's, I mean, it's really good content, and I think the points I might like to make is, firstly, you know, from a marina operator's perspective, myself, I mean, in Northland, we support what Don's achieved here, and the pathways management, planning and biosecurity management, risk management for Northland. I mean, but there is an element of inequity there, where you've got Northland boaties paying, you know, the 380,000 that is contributed towards their program, and the rest of the country not participating in the same way. And that's, you know, there are programs in other areas, but at this stage, the boatie is up here in Northland is paying twice. One is where they're levied through their marina to pay for biosecurity, and then also as a general rate, as a rate payer. So they're double hit. So we're making a big effort up here, and I think, you know, I think that needs to be looked at in terms of where we look at, you know, having a national plan. Let's get that some consistency. There should be a common argument to flow through there about who's paying. And I think that's one of the consistencies I'd like to see come through. I think it was Dave mentioned the plan around, and you did too, Peter, about what is there a standard for anti-foul applications, and should there be? Well, as a sector, NZMO, I do believe that it should be, and working in that space, and want to further our efforts there to actually make it a desirable thing to have a standard that's, when you go to pay for your anti-foul, and if you're paying 4,000 or 5,000, you want a good result. So you do want standards applied that can be recognised by the person paying. That's a good standard, and it's not going to put them at risk of picking up material inadvertently and carrying it around the coastline. So that is something we are working on, and it is something that I think the industry wants to see out there, and our boaties do. Got to recognise, it's been said that boaties are keen to do the right thing in the main, and I think we've got to support them in that endeavour.
Thank you, Chris. Zoe, can I just cut over to you? Anything else from the chat? And if not, can you advertise the rest of the webinar series?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Look, there's a comment from Serena, who's an attendee, just saying that she believes that the less plans, the better. That it will be easier and better to comply with one plan around clean hulls than 5+ different plans based on species. So she's made that comment, and we have 2 more webinars as part of this series. The next Wednesday's webinar, same time, same place, and I think most of you that registered for this one also registered for that one, is about filling gaps in the clean hull framework. And that's reflecting on the huge amount of innovation and science and work that's going on throughout the industry. And then there's a follow-on one, which is marine biosecurity tools, which is really aimed probably more at council and agency staff, where the councils that are really involved in marine biosecurity work can share their learnings and experience and tools with those that aren't so much yet.
So we can pick up these questions of, standards for all sorts of things, for anti-fouling, for inspections, water blasting, as we go through those conversations. It's like a linked series of conversations. I'm conscious of the time. I'd like to thank our panelists. Zoe, we're going to stay around and chat with anybody that wants to chat further. But I'd really like to thank you all for your attention in this really important area. And a big thank you to our panelists. I've learned a lot today. It's I've been working in this area since 2009, and every time I look, the picture gets bigger and more complex, but also the successes. And I really do acknowledge what Dave was saying. We can win on some of these fronts. We're winning on fanworm in the top of the South Island. I never thought we would. And that's been the contribution of many parties, and that's going to be the continuing story. And back to, prevention is better than cure. We all know that. So thank you.